What is up, and welcome back to another episode of the Wizards podcast. I'm your host, Greg Fimberg, and in today's episode, we're going to be recapping slash breaking down the Wizards 2026-27 NBA schedule. Obviously, this is probably going to be a shorter episode. Again, you haven't heard from me as much in August. I know you're probably sick of me at this point, hearing from me, 130 times over the last 8 or 9 months of the season. It's been nice to have a break, but I wanted to get on here and kind of talk a little bit about this schedule release. Obviously, I haven't discussed the preseason schedule or the NBA Cup schedule that were released at various points throughout the week. But I definitely wanted to get on here and kind of highlight a couple of things that I saw just from briefly glancing for a couple minutes at the Wizards' schedule. So, again, not going to be the longest episode, not too much to break down, but wanted to kind of highlight some pretty key areas that I noticed in this schedule. First and foremost, the Wizards, if we're going chronological order, will play 4 preseason games this season. The first is on October 8th against the New York Knicks, and they'll probably have their media day in very late September or one of the first days of October, a couple of days more of training camp. Then you'll get into preseason. I feel like they play the Knicks every year in preseason. I feel like it's always at Madison Square Garden. That's where it is again this year on the 8th of October. Wizards basketball will be back, and they'll be playing against the New York Knicks. You have the 10th and then the 12th against the Pistons and the Nets at home in Capital One Arena, and then the 16th at New Orleans to close out the preseason. The NBA kicks off with its opening week or opening night on the 20th. It's like Sixers against the Knicks for ring night. There's Pistons, Celtics, and there's one other late night game. I think it's Thunder Spurs. Obviously, you couldn't have expected the Wizards, despite them having more big names now, to have an opening night game. That's maybe if they, become better in the next couple years. But they do play that next night. They open at home this year at Capital One Arena, which is awesome. Great for me because I'll be there. I don't have to travel too far for the first game. But that'll be on October 21st, which is, I believe, is a Wednesday at 7 p.m. at Capital One Arena against the Milwaukee Bucks. If you're a Wizards fan, you wanted an easy game to kind of open this season. I don't know if you could have looked any further than the Milwaukee Bucks, who are projected to be one of the worst teams in the league. I kind of think Milwaukee this year is eerily similar to the Wizards. Remember that first year in the rebuild? Like they had just traded Brad and Porzingis, and they had a bunch of solid players. They still had Kuzma. They got Jordan Poole from the deal. They got some guys from the Suns like Shamit, and you were kind of playing this collection of like veterans that are good around Jordan Poole, this kind of young guy that wasn't used maybe as much on his previous team as he thought he should be used. And so it was kind of like, okay, this could be fun, but they're going to be really bad. I think the Bucks are pretty similar. They traded Giannis finally. They have heroes kind of in that Jordan Poole type role now for Milwaukee and a bunch of solid players, but they're really not going to, or at least not expected to be that good this year. They're probably going to be one of the bottom teams in the league. Maybe a team like Sacramento would have been possibly an easier opponent to play, but as it stands, this is probably one of the best case scenarios the Wizards could have asked for what should be a pretty easy win to start this season in front of your home crowd as well. AJ DeBonce's first game being at home, I think that'll certainly help. It'll be Anthony Davis. Let's presume he's here and healthy. His first game at Capital One Arena as a Wizards player, his first game as a Wizard in the regular season will be against the Milwaukee Bucks. Kyle Kuzma back in DC. I know Wizards fans aren't the biggest fans of him after everything he said. So October 21st, 7 p.m. Capital One Arena, Wizards Bucks should be a pretty easy game, I think, for Washington to open the season. The next kind of thing I want to get to is sort of these marquee matchups. Again, trying to highlight just like things that you should look for when you're looking at the schedule. And again, teams can look so much different. You're looking at games in March and April and late February. Those are after the trade deadline. Like players on this Wizards team could be on different teams, and a bunch of teams could have injuries, and they could just not be as good as they're expected to be. So like you look at it now and you're like, oh, well, this month looks easy. This month looks hard, but a lot of it can change. It's just kind of like from a first glance, 2 months from the season, this is kind of the thought process that I'm having looking at this schedule. It's not like the NFL where it's like, oh, this is the easiest schedule ever, because in the NFL, it's like, okay, well, you don't play every single team. You only play 17 games. In this, it's 82 games. You play every team at least twice. There's not really an easy schedule. There's easier patches and months, etc. Just wanted to kind of put that disclaimer out there before I get into these the Wizards' first week of the season is obviously open at Milwaukee, and then they stay home. On Friday, they play Toronto at Capital One Arena, 7 p.m. A lot up in the air with that Kawhi trade. It seems like it's probably still going to go through. So if that happens, that's a really tough opponent. You're talking, you know, Kawhi Leonard, Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett, and a bunch of really good players. Pirtle on that team, CMB, like that's a playoff team. Game 7, very close. Now they add Kawhi, really, instead of Brandon Ingram. They're going to be good. I think it's going to be a really tough game, but a really good early test for the Wizards. And then they close that week on the road at Chicago. They then go to Charlotte on, I believe, the 26th. On the road, and then Cleveland on the road. So it starts with 2 at home, then 3 on the road, and then they close October at home against the Hornets, I believe, as part of the NBA Cup on that 30th, their first NBA Cup game. So again, not a gauntlet to start the year by any means, not a cakewalk. I think against Chicago and Milwaukee, those are 2 games that they should probably win. The one is against Charlotte. They took a step back. We'll see. But again, played Washington really well, swept them last year. And then Cleveland, Toronto, those are playoff teams, top 5 seeds from last year, kind of basically running it back with Toronto getting even better. Should be pretty interesting games and competitive games. So the first 6 games for Washington, not a gauntlet. Not incredibly easy, and I think that's good. It's a good early litmus test to see, like, is this team bad still? Is it kind of middle of the pack, or are they actually taking a step? If the Wizards emerge from that 3-3, you're like, they kind of did their job. They probably beat Milwaukee. They beat Chicago on the road, probably split with Charlotte, and maybe they're losing the other games to teams like Cleveland and Toronto and etc. If they emerge 4-2, 5-1, you're like, okay, really early good signs that this team can hang tough with playoff teams from last year. They're no longer there's no association with those tanking rebuilding teams. And if they go 1-5 or 2-4, you're like, okay, you don't want to panic, but you would have liked to see a better start from this team. So again, I think it's a pretty solid first 6 games, first month to kind of ease their way into this schedule. In terms of marquee matchups, just kind of things that if you get a magnet, you put it on your fridge, or if you print out the schedule, you're one of those old school people and you want to kind of highlight some important games. I took the liberty of just kind of highlighting a couple for you. The first kind of main one, apart from obviously the home opener, is November 6th. Trae Young returns to Atlanta. Hopefully, I'm trying to figure out travel to go to that game because that's going to be really fun. It wasn't a bad breakup. It was an amicable split. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Beal and the Wizards. It's like, look, all these years we tried. It's not going to work. You know it. I know it. We're not going to pay you. That's not the same as the Wizards. They paid him. But at the same time, Atlanta was like, look, we kind of want to go in a different direction. Trey's like, okay, you won't pay me. That's fine. Get me to somewhere where they'll pay me and it's fine. And they did. And the Wizards paid him. And now it's kind of working out because Atlanta's going to be really good. The Wizards paid Trae Young. They hope he can be really good. So I don't think it's going to be one of those Paul George back to Indiana or LeBron back to Miami or Cleveland type things. Like it's going to be okay. And I honestly think tribute video, everything, they're going to show him a lot of love because he was awesome. He led them to the conference final. He was fantastic there. No bad blood there between him. I don't really think anyone there. And so, look, it should be a pretty cool. He returned there after the trade. I already know that, but this is the first time playing there. So I think it's a little different from him just being there. I remember they gave him a tribute and everything. So I don't know if they'll run that back, but will be a pretty fun game to see him go back and play for the first time in Atlanta as an opponent. Another thing I highlighted here was the first matchup between number 1 pick, AJ Debonsa, and number 2 pick, Darren Peterson. That's going to be February 27th, 1 p.m. So kind of early afternoon start for the Wizards. It's February 27th in Utah, and it's going to be on Prime Video. It's part of 6 national TV games the Wizards will have next season, which exceeds, I think they had 5, based on my math, they had 5 total over the last 5 seasons. So more national TV games next year than they've had the entire 5 previous seasons combined. It showcased, number 1, like they're trying to win, not trying to lose anymore. That's big. But number 2, you have Trae Young, Anthony Davis, AJ Debonsa, number 1 pick, all of that. People want to see that. And it's cool to kind of see the networks really going out and doing that. Other than that, obviously they returned to Washington on the 6th, March 6th, for Jazz at Wizards at Capital One Arena. So, it's going to be a while before you see AJ versus Darren in terms of regular season NBA hoops, but you'll see him 2 times in the span of 2 weeks, which is technically 1 week, I guess. So should be pretty fun there. in terms of these national TV games that I kind of highlighted, the Wizards have 6 national TV games. I know a lot of people were expecting, double digits, 10, 12, something like that. I thought that was a little high. My expectations were low. I thought they maybe get 2 or 3. The Utah game, certainly. I obviously thought maybe the Trae Young game in Atlanta, which isn't. And then, against the big team like Philly, Boston, etc. Turns out that they really like these matchups between the Wizards and the Celtics. I don't know if it's because Devonta's from Boston, or what the case is, but the Wizards play 6 national TV games. 2 of them are against the Boston Celtics. The first one, I think, is on NBC on the 24th of November, and then they play Boston again later in the season on ESPN. I think that's their only ESPN game. So they have one ESPN game on the road at Boston. AJ DeMonsa returning back home. Maybe that's the appeal there. Then you got 2 games on NBC, the one I mentioned, the 24th of November against the Celtics. And then there's also one against LeBron James and the Philadelphia 76ers in Philly at 8 p.m. That's a really fun game. National TV, that's probably the biggest spotlight you'll see from the Wiz. Obviously, the storyline of Anthony Davis against former teammate LeBron James. That should be pretty fun now that both aren't in Lakers uniforms. They have one on Prime Video, like I mentioned, against the Jazz in Utah. And then they have 2 games on Peacock, one very early against the Detroit Pistons on the road, and another one on the road against the Phoenix Suns. That Detroit game, I think it's their first national TV game of the year. It's on the 9th of November. So they have 2 national TV games in November, I believe. The Boston ESPN game is in December. And then they have other games throughout. The Philly game. Actually, the Philly game is on NBC, I think. Or at least, the Philly game's on NBC, and then just one game on ESPN against the Boston Celtics. But nonetheless, that's still 6 games on national TV for a Wizards team that's kind of been the laughingstock of the league. You never really would have thought, at this point last year, entering next, the 25-26 season, that the next season the Wizards would have this many national TV games. If you told me that, I'd be like, well, they definitely got the number 1 pick, and they probably made some pretty big moves to get some pretty big stars, and they clearly did that. So kind of getting rewarded for it should be pretty fun. And the good thing for the Wizards fans is, like, look, if you're going to the games, you probably won't miss a national TV broadcast, because only one of those games versus Boston, again on NBC, is at Capital One Arena. The other 5 on the road. So you probably won't be at those games, I would assume. They're not necessarily places that are close, except Philly, I guess. You should be able to watch the Wizards on national TV whenever they are, if you're not going to the game. Other than that, I just kind of wanted to break down a couple of tough stretches that I saw throughout the season. Again, it's like I mentioned, hard to predict. These stretches come 5, 6, 7 months down the line. You don't know who's healthy. You don't know who's playing well. But just from an August 13th perspective, it seems like the start of November, it might be a little tricky for this team. I mentioned those first 6 games in October, could split them, some hard opponents, some easy opponents. But then it gets pretty tough to start in November. You're at Orlando, you're home against Atlanta, you're on the road at Atlanta, and then you're at Oklahoma City, at Detroit, at Indiana, home against Detroit, home against Houston, home against Memphis. That is before that Memphis game. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 8 games. All 8 games are against teams that were in the 2026 NBA playoffs or the Indiana Pacers, who are now healthy. And if they were healthy, they certainly would have been in last year's playoffs, a team that was in the finals 1 game away just, 2 years ago. So that's a really tough stretch. It should be pretty, easy to tell early on if is this Wizards team legit, or are they going to really struggle, or are they going to take some time to figure it out? Because remember, these are guys that haven't really played that much basketball with each other as teammates at the NBA level. The next toughest stretch, I think, and probably the toughest stretch of the season, is the entire month of January. I mean, it's really hard. They open the month on the 1st of January at home against the Spurs. They have a 5-game homestand, which you would think, oh, Greg, that's probably easy month. No, when you consider the first game's against the Spurs, and then they got the Clippers, the Lakers, the Thunder, and the Timberwolves. Again, that's 4 out of 5, playoff teams in the West last year, and a team in the Clippers that could still be good. They have Garland, they have Ingram, they have Wagler. They're still a decent team. It's actually a 6-game homestand because they play the Hawks. So that's 6 games at home to open the month, but against 5 teams that were in the playoffs last year, and the other one being the Clippers. Then they go on to play On the road at Philly, on the road at Houston, really tough games. Home against Indiana and Boston, really tough opponents. On the road against the Nuggets, and then the Clippers, and then the Lakers, and then the Blazers, and then home for one against Sacramento before hitting the road again and playing the Indiana Pacers. That's 16 games in the month of January. 11 of them are against 2026 playoff teams. Two of the five that aren't against those teams are against the Pacers, that I would still consider a playoff team. So technically 13 of 16. Other two of those three are against the Clippers, who what were a game away, maybe 2 games away from being in the playoffs last year, and probably would have made it if they didn't start 6-20. Had to trade James Harden at the deadline because they didn't want to pay him. Then the really one easy game, like winnable game, you should win this game, is home against the Kings. In a lot of months, not a lot of teams are tanking, so it's not like last year where it's like anytime you play the Kings or the Nets or the Wizards, it's an easy win. That's not the case, but there's still games against the Bucks, the Kings, teams like Brooklyn, that just aren't supposed to be good. Chicago, even, that you should probably win. So that's the thought process here, is that they have some pretty tough months throughout the season, and we'll kind of see what they do. But again, that's probably going to wrap it up for this episode of the Wizards podcast, breaking down the 2026-27 Wizards schedule. Thanks for listening, as always.